They're stealing your vote, they're stealing your power, and they're stealing your money. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm James Peppe, and this is Pep Talks. So on today's episode, we're going to talk about all of those things, the three ways that they're stealing your power, money, and vote. And we're going to explain those in plain English and then offer some solutions. Now, let me warn you from the start. This stuff is kind of inside baseball stuff, right? It's a little bit dry, it's a little bit wonky, but it's really, really important. And nobody else is talking about it. The media is not talking about it. Certainly the political parties aren't talking about it. But it's really important, and I think it's worth taking a few minutes to think about because, again, it's your vote, it's your power, it's your money, everything that matters here in America and our democracy. So I'm going to walk you through it as quickly and as simply as I can. Try to keep it to the top level as much as possible, not get down too far into the weeds. But hang with me, and I think you'll find out exactly what I mean when I say this is really critical to us. Okay. First of all, politicians on both sides. Remember, Pep Talks is about both sides and the power establishment and how they're manipulating us and conditioning us to accept certain things. And of course, the radical realists come in behind and reinforce all that. But let's start with how they're stealing your vote. The simplest way to look at it is this. These long elections that we have now, weeks at a time, right? The polls open and they're open for 1, 2, 3 weeks, however long they're open. This is a way of stealing your vote. It's a way of diluting your vote. It's a way where politicians, especially at the local level, but at all levels really, can browbeat voters. And when these windows are open, local volunteers will flood into neighborhoods, key neighborhoods. You hear it on the news every election night, the neighborhoods and the precincts and the counties and the areas that make the difference and swing elections one way or the other in the end. But they'll flood into these areas for weeks at a time, and they'll bang on your door, and they will press you to vote, and they will influence your vote as you're doing it, especially if you're somebody who's easily influenced, right? Maybe you're an older person whose mental capacity is not what it used to be. Whatever. They will put all kinds of pressure on you. And in many instances, the way they're doing it now with absentee, it used to be called absentee ballots, but now it's just mail-in votes, right? Mail-in ballots. There are ways that they can actually help you vote at your door, which sounds great, right? Nice and convenient for you and all that sort of thing. But when they're doing that with susceptible, sort of vulnerable, easy to manipulate folks in many instances, and they're portraying themselves as neutral election helpers from the city or the county or whatever, this is how they steal your vote, right? They flood these neighborhoods for 2, 3 weeks and they harvest lots and lots of votes at the last minute. Now, I'm not a big believer in the 2020 election being stolen. I really don't think it was 7 million votes or whatever that number is. It's too much. But elections do get stolen at the local level all the time. And while that's not as sexy and interesting and sensational as a presidential election being stolen, it is still important and we ought to pay attention to it. But this is how they steal your vote, right? With these long elections, they tell you, it's ironic, right? It's ironic because they tell you that it's all about helping you, that it's all about making voting easier for you because it's so hard, right? Otherwise, making it easier for you and increasing the voter turnout this way. And the premise seems to be that anything that increases voter turnout and makes it easier is a good thing for democracy. That's not a given. We can talk about that another time. But this is what they do. They steal your vote by conditioning and manipulating and persuading you to believe that more votes, easier votes, doing it this way is good for all of us. Not necessarily, folks. Your vote, people who are civically engaged, who pay attention, who see things for what they are and are working in their own way to make things better, your vote is getting diluted when they bring in all of their party regulars, their extremists, and then vulnerable, persuadable voters who might have stayed out of it otherwise or who might have voted a different way or who knows what. But that's what these long voting windows are for, is to manipulate the outcomes under the guise of making elections better, more accessible, and increasing turnout. Don't fall for that. Now let's talk about the ways the power establishment steals your power, right? This is a really interesting thing, and you'll need to stay with me, but it's about redistricting. You hear about it from time to time in the media. You probably don't follow all the stories I do. I have some firsthand experience in the redistricting process, and let me just clarify that for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, redistricting. It's about how every 10 years after the census or the count number of people in our country, it's about how they redraw the congressional and state legislative district boundaries. And this has a huge effect on which of the two parties, Republicans and Democrats, have an advantage in the next 10 years worth of elections and can control things. And there's a term, again, if you're not familiar, called gerrymandering, where the party in power that gets to draw those maps, because it's a legislative process, right? Which means it's partisan. And the party that's in control always, 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 and don't let anybody fool you and pretend like this is a one-sided problem. It's a two-sided problem. The party in control always gerrymanders, which means they always rig the system. They draw boundaries in all kinds of weird ways that give their party an advantage in the upcoming elections. And this is how they steal your power, right? Because here's what they tend to do. They tend to make districts for their side as safe as possible based on the voting history, based on the party affiliations. They try to pack in their voters into a bunch of districts and make their districts safe, their state safe for their party, that insulate them from too much competition from the other party or anybody else. And one of the ways they do that, by the way, is they take all of the voters of the other party and they pack them into one district or two districts or just a few districts. So they know, for example, they know that there are some areas that are just not going to win. So let's take those areas, and instead of competing and wasting our resources in those areas, we'll just put in all of their voters in there, and then we won't even contest it. They can win it by 80% or more, whatever. Who cares? But the next district now becomes a district that we can win. And again, in both cases, your power is lessened because your vote means less in those situations. 435 congressional districts in America, and nearly all of them are what is considered safe, meaning they're not very competitive, meaning the other party hardly even challenges it. So that's why you see so much gridlock in Congress, because most of those congressmen don't feel any pressure from their constituencies because they're going to win based on the setup of their district. That steals your power. That lessens your choice. And it's all done in the name of, I don't know, they say fairness, but it's really about stealing your power, making the elections less competitive, trying to lock in advantages for one party or the other, which one happens to be in control. Now, there's some interesting things going on right now. The state of Texas is looking to break the tradition of redrawing districts every 10 years, and they're going to do it now in the middle of the decade. Because why? And this is really bizarre, folks. They're right out in the open. President Trump and Governor Abbott have come right out and said that they want to do it now to solidify the Republican advantage in Texas by creating perhaps as many as 5 new districts that should be won by Republicans if you believe in past voter history being an indicator of what's to come. They're not even being subtle about it. This is saying the silent part out loud. Both sides have done this forever. Now Republicans are just saying it out loud and brazenly because they don't fear any backlash, because it's the kind of issue that most of us don't pay close attention to. That's why I'm talking about today on PepTalks, because we need to start paying closer attention. Now, let me get a little bit into the details of how redistricting works and how we can fix it. Okay, it works like this. The party in power at the legislative level goes about the business of drawing boundaries, drawing new districts. And what they do to give themselves political advantages is they use data brought into the map making system that shows party affiliation, or they use the voting history in existing legislative districts and congressional districts and precincts. And then they use that voter information and that party affiliation information to create districts that give them advantages. It's as simple as that. And the way to fix that is through artificial intelligence. Like everything else these days, it's through AI. You write an AI prompt that simply says you can't use partisan voting histories and data, party affiliation. You can't use that. And now I've had people tell me Pep, it's not going to work because all programs can be skewed. All programs can be influenced or can be biased, right? And that's true. That's true. They can, except for this. Except for this. When a law is written to use AI to write neutral, objective, nonpartisan legislative and congressional boundaries, and again, all you got to do is make sure that you can't bring into that process partisan data like voting history and party affiliation data. You can't bring that stuff in, right? And if they try to bring that stuff in vis-a-vis the AI prompt, everybody in the world will see it and catch them. And you can stop it at that point. I don't think even Trump and the Republicans would be as brazen to write an AI prompt that says that you can use partisan data in this process. And that's the way to regulate it and to demand accountability. Easy fix. Trust me, I'll elaborate on it another time, but that's how we fix that. And that's how we can take some of our power back. Let me talk about the third and maybe the most important part of all of this. It's not. They're all important. Voting, power. But they're stealing your money in the same kind of ways to all of this. And here's how they're doing it. They're making you as taxpayers fund their party programs, their party operations. Understand this. Political parties, Republicans and Democrats and other parties, they are private organizations, private entities. They're nothing more than associations of like-minded people. Lots of us identify as one or the other because we share values or priorities or policy ideas or whatever, right? We agree more with one party's agenda than the other. So we might call ourselves Republicans, but make no mistake, those parties are private entities. They're privately run, they're privately organized, and they control the rules and how it works. And here's the thing, again, you're funding them. You're funding all the parties through your taxpayer dollars. And here's how that works. And this is the main way. There's a number of ways that your tax dollars are getting siphoned off and stolen from you and used by the parties. And here's the main way, in my opinion, in a way that's got an easy fix. When there's primary elections for president and all down the ballot for local elections, governors, local communities, whatever, when you have a primary election, the most well-known are the presidential primaries state by state. Those are all paid for by the taxpayers. And those primaries are nothing more than the parties choosing their candidates. Who are we going to pick to be our candidate for president to go up against the other parties in the November general election? You hear that term, general election. That's the main election that all of us have a stake in. But the primaries, they're party elections. They're party operations for the parties to choose their nominees. Who's going to run for them in the general election? So the quick question there is, why? Why are Republican taxpayers paying for primaries for the Democrat Party to pick their nominees, or for any of them for that matter? Why don't the parties just do it? Why don't the parties pay for their own process for picking their nominees and do it any way they want? Do it any way they want. But they're having the taxpayers, having you pay for it. They're stealing your money to have you pay for it. And there's a lot of downsides to this, but one of the most important ones, and one again that's not widely understood at all, is this. In general elections for president, how often, election after election after election, do most of us say, we hate all of them, you don't like any of the choices, but that's what we got. We got a choice between bad and worse, the lesser of two evils. A central fundamental problem in our system, in our democracy, and one of the things that PepTalks was set up to try to address and to help all of us feel that way. When I ran for president in 2020 and I stomped on the streets of New Hampshire and elsewhere, people told me over and over and over again, it'd be great if we had more choices like you, Pep, but we don't. We get the choice of Clinton or Trump, Trump or Biden, Trump or Kamala Harris. Those are our choices, and we hate those choices, but that's what we got. So what can we do? We have to choose the lesser of two evils. But here's the thing. Those people, and most of us, don't understand that we have a say in those choices. In the primaries, in the party process to pick candidates, we can have an influence in which of those candidates become the general election candidates. Now, that's if we choose to participate in the party primaries, which until something better comes along, we ought to do. If we're not happy with the choices we ultimately get, Trump versus Harris in the last election, if we're not satisfied with that, then get involved in the party process and influence the parties to pick better candidates with integrity and with character and who you can trust. I know that that's not easy, that you probably say, because the radical realists have taught us this. Yeah, that's never going to happen. And it sounds difficult and burdensome to get involved in the parties. And it is, there's some work, no doubt about it. But if you are dissatisfied and upset with the kind of choices you're getting every November, if you're upset with all of that, that's your way to change it. Now, again, that whole process is a way for them to steal your money. They should be funding it themselves, but they're not. They're funding it with your tax dollars. And it adds up to, over time, billions and billions of dollars and more across the country. And it makes no sense. And so let's get back to how we can solve these problems. I already talked about how we can solve the redistricting problem, but let me just remind you what I said, which is we can write AI programs that will solve that instantly. And nobody's talking about it. Nobody. The press isn't talking about it. The parties certainly aren't talking about it. And that tells you, right, there's a bit of a conspiracy going on where these guys don't want to talk about the real solutions. They just want to talk about the sensational aspect of it, which, by the way, again, there's only so much sensationalism you can put into redistricting, right? Which is, Texas trying to steal elections going forward, the way they're doing redistricting and that sort of thing. And the gerrymandering thing, that can be made to be a little bit sensational. But the real story is underneath the surface, which is we can have neutral redistricting, let the chips fall where they may, and then we can be done with this whole gerrymandering thing, right? Forget about that forever, forever. And how about those long elections where they're stealing your vote? How about that? Well, that's simple. Now, I know that some conservatives, and I've been one mostly my entire life, and I still am, though I think the definition has changed in the last few years. But a lot of us get accused of being so old-fashioned, beyond old-fashioned. We want to take the country back to the 1950s. But I'm going to talk about it when it comes to the way they're stealing your vote through these long elections. We need to go back, not out of nostalgia, not out of tradition, not in a way that is unrealistic, as the radical realists would say, but we need to go back to voting on election day. Simple as that. They're using these long windows to dilute and steal your vote. So let's go back to an election day vote, with a few exceptions for the traditional absentee voters who can't make it to the polls for a legitimate reason, not just because it's too hard, right? Unless you're an old person with a walker and no reliable transportation, we can get you an absentee ballot under very carefully controlled circumstances. We can get you an absentee ballot. But I think for a number of reasons, we need to go back to voting on election day. And not the least of which is that we've lost something in terms of our American civil cohesion, togetherness. Voting together on election day, all of us across the country, that is something that for a long time defined our democratic process and created civil unity. So I think we've lost a lot of that, all under the guise of trying to make it easier and to increase voter turnout in the intentionally mistaken notion that that is good for democracy. It's not. It's not. What's good for democracy is encouraging civil involvement, encouraging people to get informed about what's going on, and then for everybody to come together and vote on election day as we used to. Now, I've got some ideas about that. I think we ought to make election day a national holiday. And we ought to consider moving it from the first week in November to maybe some other time. I mean, who knows? Maybe the 4th of July would be a great time for election day. We should celebrate election day as one of the cornerstones of our democracy, if not the cornerstone. And we should encourage young people. We should teach that this is your civic responsibility, the way we used to teach that, and build that up on election day and do it in a way, like I said, as a national holiday where people are home doing backyard barbecues, again, a lot like the 4th of July and maybe on the 4th of July. And we can reinstill the idea of paying attention during the elections and being engaged and talking to your neighbors in civil fashion and all that sort of thing leading up to election day, to this national holiday where we all celebrate the greatness of our democracy. Now, there's one area where I'm totally open to compromise on this whole thing, because the left will push back hard against getting rid of these elongated election setups. But I could be persuaded that maybe we could have an election weekend. Maybe we have a national holiday on a Monday and we take that 3-day weekend and we open up the polls. I still am not a big fan of doing it by mail. I want people to go. I want them to go. Voting polls open 7 to 7, whatever. And you go in and you vote. You have the backyard barbecues, the get-togethers, the reunions, whatever it is. You take an hour out of your day, maybe first thing in the morning or at lunchtime or whatever. And you go to the polls and you vote. And you got 3 days to do it. And if that's not enough, tough. But maybe it's not a holiday day. Maybe it's a holiday weekend. And we celebrate with all the festivals and all of the parades and all that stuff. And we elevate election day to what it's supposed to be in this country. I think that'd be cool. I think it'd be good. And I think it would bring back some of that cohesion in our country around that civic responsibility, even if we continue to be divided over, and we will be, right? But we continue to be divided over important issues. That's a way to remind ourselves that on the really basic, most important things, we're together, we're together. And the last part, how do we solve this thing about primaries and them stealing your money? And again, that's simple, just stop. Now, the parties aren't going to, right? See, the political parties control not just the Congress, but every state legislature. They write all the rules, and they've created a rule structure that favors them. As much as they hate each other, the Republicans and Democrats are okay when it's just them mano a mano fighting constantly over who's in control and trading control back and forth. You know, the whole pendulum swings thing in the elections and back and forth from one side to the other and all. They're okay with trading power. What they don't want is anybody else intruding on their turf, right? So they write all the rules to keep third parties out, to keep independents out. You know, think about this. You probably don't know this. Most people don't. But I found out as an independent running for president, actually I was running for the Republican nomination, but kind of an independent candidate. But here's the point. In every state, there are different rules for how to get on the ballot. Republicans and Democrats, their nominees, they get on the ballot automatically. They wrote the rules. They're on that ballot automatically. If you're an independent, if you're a third party, if you're somebody else, not so fast. They make it very difficult. Each state has a different set of rules. There's high filing fees to get on the ballot for any office. You have to get a gazillion signatures on a petition in a very specific sort of way, and you have to do it in a very short period of time, like 30 days or something. You have to do that. And again, it's a very specific sort of format for these petitions. So if there's one comma or a period out of place, they throw the whole thing out or whatever. The whole thing is set up to protect the Republicans and Democrats and their control of things and their ability to steal your tax money, to have your tax money pay for their primaries and other party functions. So we've got to find a way to put pressure on the state legislatures and maybe through an overriding election reform bill in Congress that covers everybody, maybe. But we got to find a way to force them to get rid of those kinds of rules, to stop using taxpayer money for private political party purposes, and go open up the system to everybody. Another way, by the way, sort of indirectly a part of this, is they ought to take party designations off all of the ballots. The election process is democratic for all of us, right? It's not supposed to favor the parties. But when you put an R or a D behind people's names and lots of people go to the polls, and as you get down the ballot, down from president, further down, you might not know much about who these other guys are because unfortunately we don't pay as much attention as we should. Then you just start voting for the R's or the D's. It's not fair. It's not fair to the independents. And I think if we took those designations off the ballot, it would result in more competitive elections. And it would result in the Republicans and the Democrats having to educate their own voters about who their preferred candidates are. That's one of the other aspects of this. When you have the R's and the D's, it makes it easier for them to maintain control, which again goes back to stealing your power, but to maintain control, because now they don't so much have to persuade you about how great their individual candidates are. They just have to tell you, vote for the Republicans or vote for the Democrats. There are even states where you can push one button and vote all or the other. Now, if you're a hardline partisan, I used to be, I'm not anymore, but I used to be. If you're one of those, that sounds great. It makes my time easy. I walk into the voting booth, I hit R, and I'm out. That sounds good. But those are the extremists, right? For most of us in the middle, in between the extremes, that's not so great. That detracts from the big picture of what's important and what's good for America. And what's good for us is getting that party advantage out of the law. Make those parties pay for and earn their own place and do what the rest of the candidates on the ballot have to do, which is go door to door or whatever. Get people to know who they are, what they stand for, and persuade Americans to vote for them instead of rigging the system. I kind of have to shake my head a little bit because for all this talk over the last few years, and especially from Donald Trump, to be candid about it, of stolen elections and rigged elections and so forth. The funny thing about it, that's kind of been under that radar because, Trump accuses his political adversaries, Democrats, of stealing the elections and so forth. It's really been true for a long, long time that it's both parties who rig the elections. And whoever happens to be in control of their state at the time, they have the advantage. But the other party doesn't complain too much. They do in their political sort of way, of course, but they know that sooner or later they'll get their turn to be in control and to exercise power, your power, to turn the advantage back to them. And that's why you see it flip-flop back and forth from Republicans to Democrats. They're stealing their vote, they're stealing your power, and they're stealing your money. And they use the systems like this, and they use excuses, right? They tell you that it's for your benefit. It's for your convenience. It's making things easier. It's making our democracy better, blah, 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 blah. It's really for them. And I think you know that. I think you know that. But there are ways that we can fix it, but only when we come together as the common sense majority that we are. When I keep talking about on Pep Talks, we need to start raising our voices. That starts with understanding these things, even when they're issues that aren't sexy, aren't sensational. Redistricting, for Christ's sake, it's awful unless you've been involved in it like I have, working on it from the inside, and you see how important it is. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't. It's because they're stealing your vote, they're stealing your power, and they're stealing your money. And they're doing it together. This is what some of my friends call the duopoly in the right. They're working together to steal your vote, power, and money. We need to put a stop to it. And there are easy ways to do it, despite what the radical realists would say. Oh, that's too hard. That's never going to happen. That sounds great. That's very idealistic, Pep. But it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. Well, it's never going to happen if we don't make it happen, like everything else. Like everything else. So that's what that's all about. We'll talk about it some more in and out of all of our pep talks in the future. I'll be talking about these issues and how they relate to other things because they're fundamental. This is the foundation of our political process, our democracy. When you hear the partisans in the media and elsewhere, really the extremists, talking about the threats to our democracy, they're not really talking about these sort of foundational, neutral things they're pretending to. What they're talking about is the things that give their side an advantage or take away that advantage because the other side's cheating or whatever. These are the things that should matter to all of us. As I get close to the end here, let me say this. I think this issue is important, and I'm obviously passionate about it. And I think one of the things that we can say is that it's in line with one of the greatest Americans that we've ever had, how they felt about our democracy. And I'm talking about George Washington, who warned us from the very beginning about the dangers of hyperpartisanship. And here we are. They control everything. And most of us who are sick of the result, have been for a long time, disgusted by it, we've just been conditioned by the power establishment and the extremists and all those radical realists to believe that this is just the way it is and there's nothing we can do about it. And that's how I want to bring it full circle back to what Pep Talks is all about, which is showing you that it doesn't have to be this way, that we can have things the way they should be. But it's up to us. And we have to break that self-fulfilling prophecy where we don't think we can change it, so we don't try, and nothing changes. That's what it's all about, folks. That's what we're here to talk about week in and week out. And I sure appreciate your interest and your attention. And so let me wrap up with this. Our power comes in our individual selves paying attention, but also bringing others together and ramping up our voices. We are the common sense, true silent majority in this country. 80% of this country is made up of people like you and me who are sick of it all, but don't think that we have any power, and therefore we've given our power away to the extremists and to the power establishment. And the way to get it back is the most simple way you could think of, which is we have to start raising our voices together. And one of the ways we can do it is by supporting shows like PepTalks and others that may emerge out there. I haven't seen too many yet, but hopefully they're coming. By subscribing to our channels on social media, by liking episodes like this, and really especially by sharing them with your friends and telling them how important it is that they get on board too. That's how we do it. We just bring our voices together. That's what moves the world in this social media era that we live in, is how many views and likes and follows and subscribers a person gets. And it's not an easy process for sure from this end, but it will make all the difference in the long term. So I'm asking you just to do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and go ahead and share it with your friends right away. Now, let me add this other thing. Comment for me, would you? Let me know what you think. Offer your input in your thoughts, and let's get some of this civil conversation going, because that's another important part about Pep Talks, is that we try to not only talk about things in plain English and easy to understand and make it relatable to our everyday lives, but we're trying to bring civility back to political conversations and make it not so fearful for people, right? Don't want to talk about politics because people end up fighting and families divide and friends divide. Let's get back to an America where we can have civil disagreements and talk about these things and little by little persuade each other and hopefully use that common sense that Pep Talks is all about. So make some comments. Let me know what you think. I really enjoy the opportunity to talk to you like this. And as always, I look forward to the next chance we have to get together this way and talk about all the important issues that matter. So thank you for your attention and for your consideration. I'm always grateful and appreciative. Thanks, everybody.